Bob McKenzie said that Matvei Michkov will be in North America soon, and he's going to be in Nashville for the draft, plus his agent has scheduled interviews for a lot of different teams. We'll be talking about a few more pros and cons for Matvei Michkov and what some Habs analysts have to say about him. Plus, could Christian Dvorak be traded very soon? He has a no-trade clause kicking in very soon, so maybe they'll want to move him before that. And finally, an awesome quote from Sean Monahan about Coach Marty and how much he's making the players love the game. So we'll talk about all of that on this edition of Habs Digest. The first thing we're going to jump into, Jesse, is this Matvei Michkov stuff. I mean, we've talked about Matvei Michkov. It feels like almost every day since the draft lottery ended for Habs fans, knowing we got a top 5 pick, essentially locking in Michkov. But some Habs analysts don't think that Michkov might be going to the Habs. Regardless, Bob McKenzie, we're keeping updated on Matvei Michkov, and he said here he arrives in the U.S. in the next day or so, will be in Nashville early next week, and his agent, Max Molliver, has scheduled interviews with multiple clubs looking to accommodate as many as possible within reason, of course, those teams with picks in the top 10 or so, for example. Quick note on this, Jesse. Do you think Montreal will be interviewing Matvei Michkov? We'll get into maybe some quotes from some analysts that think maybe not, but I mean, what do you think about this, right? He clearly wants to play in the NHL. He clearly has his agent there looking for teams to talk to him. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this whole situation?
He will definitely be meeting with Kent Hughes. I feel like Nick Bobrov has a very good pulse, one of our lead scouts, especially with Russia. Of course, having such a multi-dimensional scouting team, of course, it comes, very much in handy when we're dealing with international players such as Michkov. And it's actually amazing that we're finally getting this chance to interview him, because we've been hearing, obviously, so many rumors. This isn't the first time, but of teams having a very hard time contacting him, everything else. But what we've kind of heard from that subsequently is that maybe it's not so much Matvei Michkov not wanting to speak to these teams, but actually just kind of listening to the powers that be, so to speak, in Russia that are kind of putting a cap on what he can speak with. So I'm sure he's just chomping at the bit to get to North America to speak with these different GMs. And what I'm liking right now, though, is like the Matvei Michkov rumors, it's heating up out of control. Like, I really like Bob McKenzie's list on that. I think it's one of the more sensible lists of the Montreal Canadiens, actually picking him at number 5. But what I find interesting is that there's been rumors lately of the Anaheim Ducks being very interested in Matvei Michkov. As we know, the GM there, he studied under Steve Yzerman, who's known for going off the board, right? He just recently picked Maurice Sider, where a lot of other teams had him halfway through the first, and, they grabbed him early, top 10. So maybe looking to do a similar type of move. So it's going to be very interesting. I'm just glad that Matvei Michkov is going to get an opportunity to really represent himself to these GMs.
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing. And I'm sure some teams have tried to talk to him or his agent before. I'm sure it's not the first time he's going to be talking to these teams, but maybe it is. Like, being in person is very different. Getting a vibe off someone right in front of you is very different. And again, I think just showing up to these interviews, to the draft, shows his true eagerness to play in North America. But if you talk to like some Habs reporters like Arber and Basu, he really doesn't think Montreal is going to take them based on his conversations with team personnel. And his opinion is that adding another one-dimensional undersized scoring winger into the team's top 6 is not a recipe for a Stanley Cup. And then he says you need to build a roster that can win the cup, and while drafting for need might be seen as foolhardy, drafting with your team's reality in mind seems to be practically smart. But then he also says that the majority of Habs fans want Michkov, right? And I think he thinks it's because, like, the Habs haven't had a 40-goal scorer, 50-goal scorer in, like, decades and decades, and no 100-point scorer since, I think, Kovalev in, like, 2008. So having that guy who can come in and maybe do that pure offensive upside is super tantalizing for Habs fans. And I actually disagree with Basu here about, drafting for need. I think just how many times have you seen a team draft for need because it's like, hey, no, this would really suit the team. And like, too small, one-dimensional forwards is not a recipe for a Stanley Cup. I think you can fill in the gaps. I think if you have a guy who might have that level of Michkov's talent, you got to just pick him. And look, we've had this conversation a million times. But do you agree or disagree with his sentiment? And are you sort of on the same side? Like, this offensive potential is just so tantalizing as a Habs fan who hasn't seen a true, like, close to 100-point player since I've been alive, for sure, and since you've been alive too.
I definitely disagree, and fans of the show definitely know I disagree. Like, we know that we're lucky to get a chance at him with really in that top 5 sort of pick. Like, the name of the game in the NHL is almost outscoring your defensive problems. And not only that, but we know we have a GM in Kent Hughes where he wants an offensive type of team. Like, for me, having 2 potential 40, 50 goal scorers, even though they play the same position, that's not a problem at all. I would argue that's what you need in today's league to win a Stanley Cup. On a first line, a second line, imagine having those type of goal scoring threats on your first two lines, I think it's a different type of game now. Like, size doesn't matter as much. If this guy's coming in the league and he could light up the net, that is exactly what the Montreal Canadiens need.
I think so too. I think, look, I don't want to say I think the Habs should take him because we've said this a million times, but we're just going to keep an eye on it. I think it's cool he's interviewing with teams. I guess we'll just see where Montreal ends up. But we'll be live streaming the draft. A quick reminder, guys, join us because we're going to be there. We're going to be talking about it with you guys. So mark it on your calendars right now. Topic number 2 today, Jesse. Let's talk a bit about Christian Dvorak. This news here is a couple days old. It's from the Sean Monahan signing, which we missed. Unfortunately, this is our first video in about a week, so apologies, guys. We kind of didn't address that, but travel for me and just communication has not been super easy. Time zones were crazy out of whack, but we're back, and we should be back at least, I'd say, 4 or 5 times a week from now on. So let's talk about this whole Christian Dvorak thing. So, Marco D'Amico, of course, says it's great value for the Habs signing Sean Monahan, but he says this adds further fuel to the fire that the Canadiens could be looking to move Christian Dvorak before his no-trade clause kicks in on July 1st, and that is soon. And if we look at Christian Dvorak's production, not the best. I mean, I know the Habs traded 2 pretty good picks from the Jesperi Kotkaniemi offer sheet for Christian Dvorak, and he's been a very solid penalty killer. He's had a little tiny bit of power play time. He's just kind of a solid player, good third-line center. But, Jesse, the thing with this is, if the Habs want to play Kirby Dach long-term center, and if you have Monahan coming back, who's probably going to play a good bit of center, why not move Dvorak? I mean, he's owed $4.45-ish million over the next 2 seasons. Do you think a team might give anything of substance for Dvorak, or do you think at this point the Habs would just be... would have to settle for a really, really low-value return?
Well, we definitely wouldn't be selling at his highest value, which kind of goes against how Kent Hughes does like to do business. I'm kind of torn on this, Josh, though, because as you know from last year, we had so many injuries. Mm-hmm. So, of course, it's nice when you have a lot of centers that can kind of jump in there when, of course, the injuries inevitably happen. But I would have to say this decision is going to be very contingent on what they think of our prospects coming up. And they're going to have to maybe even make a little bit of a decision on this ahead of time. And I think what would help in making that decision before that July 1st no trade clause is how Owen Beck had such an amazing camp last year. And I think, you know, Montreal management, they very much think that this could happen for next year. I think I'm kind of in favor of at least testing the waters of what the market would be, because for me, I just really want to have a solidified lineup next year. I want to know this player is going to be on the first line, second line. Like, there's going to be a little bit of movement, but for the most part, kind of having your stalwarts of kind of having that really stable and solidified lineup. And I feel like maybe, you know, clearing a little bit of room, because obviously right now we're having Dach, we got Suzuki, obviously. And then I think Beck could very much make the team, Monahan, but then also Jake Evans, right? Yeah. So we're starting to, you know, it's a nice problem to have. I feel like, you know, we maybe need to leave a little bit more room for those younger players to come into the organization. I feel like we're really lucky. We're like, Beck could slip into that 3C spot really well, in my opinion. And you could argue possibly even more effectively than Christian Dvorak at this point. So I'm definitely open to look at it. But, you know, obviously we want to, you know, don't want to just disregard the center depth right away. So we'll definitely need to be caution. You know, definitely need to take our time when we're making this type of move.
Yeah, I think if the right payout comes along, and if they're searching for a trade and the team gives a great offer you can't refuse, I think you got to take it. But I feel like they're not going to get what they want for Dvorak, and I think it's probably going to lead to them keeping him. And you can probably play some guys on the wing. Maybe Dach will play a bit more wing. Maybe Monahan will play a bit more wing. We saw him play it a bit last year. So we'll see. I'm sure they'll find a way to make everything work out, but a bit of an interesting thing nonetheless. Final thing I want to talk about, Coach Marty making his guys love the game. And again, this is also a quote from just after the Sean Monahan thing. Of course, we missed a few days in news here, but check this out. Eric Engel's quote from Sean Monahan, "Marty really helped me love the game more and more as the season went along." He says, "Find coaches who do this." And I think that's true. How often have you seen players complain about coaches across the NHL, right? Coaches making them work really hard. They're super hard on the players. And while Marty definitely isn't like, super easy going, he seems like a fairly intense dude when it comes to practice. He's still super friendly. And he is making his guys buy into the system for him. Sorry, his concepts. For him. For their teammates. They're working as a group. They're working to play the game they love in hockey. And when you hear a guy like Monahan, who's been through so much crap over the last few years, fans hating on him, himself probably just so frustrated that he can't stay healthy on the ice, to hear that he says, "Man, I just love the game with Coach Marty." For someone who's been through so much, that speaks volumes to me. And I think it's just something that is an amazing quality to have in a coach.
It's so true. To be honest, I really liked that press conference from Sean Monahan. I thought that he was just saying all the right things. You know, for sure. It's what I like about Marty is, like you said, he's intense, but he's also positive.
Yeah.
So I like, you know, I find it's a really nice balance. And what I'm liking about this is like, he's really not just allowing players to sign here now, but I think in the future that a lot of players are going to be paying attention to this as well. Like even in the press conference, like one of the journalists was asking Sean Monahan, like, do you feel that players don't want to come to Montreal because of the weather and taxes and what have you? And in his opinion, he felt like it was a non-factor. Yeah. Maybe he was just being nice in that time, but honestly, he came across as just like a genuine sort of person. Just like this wasn't really part of his thought process. This is just an amazing place to play, best fans of the world, you know, and an amazing coach. I mean, a young upcoming team. So it's nice. It was a nice change for Sean Monahan coming from a veteran team. Obviously, a lot of injuries just to come to like a new environment, right? And these are all things that we're hearing all the time. But when it has tangible effects of bringing players to your team that are really going to help your squad, I mean, you know, Ken Hughes definitely likes to he must love hearing that news.
Yeah, I mean, the players all seem friendly. We're seeing lots of pictures of players with certain other players we're not covering in this video, but that might be future Habs. But players just seem to love the culture here in Montreal, love the coaching, love their teammates, love everything about it. And it might make Montreal a premier destination to play once again, and that is a really exciting prospect. But that'll do it for this news edition of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. We're like 50 subs away from 6,000, guys. Hit that button now. We're almost there. We know you can help us out. I'm Josh Goss for my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.